shortly after what appears to be a domestic terrorist attack. In the interest of intellectual honesty, it's not 100% clear that that's what happened. No one's been convicted of anything yet, but based on the smell test and just in my layman's opinion, analyzing the video evidence, this clearly seems to be some guy deciding to ram into a crowd of counter protesters. He killed at least one person, injured, I know more than a dozen, possibly 2 dozen other people. I had felt a rush to make a video and give you my thoughts and put them out there because I have been following the Unite the Right rally the entire time. I didn't attend it, but I was stalking everybody's periscopes, just watching the shit show breakdown. I'm not going to go over the details of exactly what happened as a play-by-play. I think there's other people who have done that much better than I can. I don't think there'd be anything interesting to add there. So instead, I decided just to write down some points, some ideas, and put them out there, things that I think people should keep in mind or consider. So this is another typical rambling video of mine, just a general rumination on Charlottesville and the Unite the Right rally. That went down. First of all, it should be said, I think, that political violence is just a non-starter and should be avoided at all costs, particularly on the right. I imagine this is pretty obvious, but you see comments, joking around about how they deserved it, and they were all commie scumbags and throw them off the helicopters, and yeah, it's fun, it's funny, but in seriousness, political violence will not get you anywhere. If you do that, you're just going to radicalize the other side, who are going to escalate, and then it becomes tit for tat. They go kill some more people, and they'll feel morally justified in doing so. And of course, your side will lose legitimacy and will have a more difficult time appealing to people who are outside the no normies. You have a much harder time swelling your numbers if you do that. I don't really have much to add, but I figure it's important to put it out there. After someone does, again, what I think is very clear, but perhaps not completely certain yet, after someone does an act of political terrorism. Yeah, that's the first point. Next thing, as I was battling my way through Twitter, like a good keyboard warrior that unfortunately I seem to turn into when I have a day off, I noticed how utterly atrocious and just wormy and pathetic and completely unreliable the conservatives were in the first 24 hours of the Unite the Rally, or Unite the Right rally down in Charlottesville. Um, Basically, what you'd expect, quite frankly. I mean, just to name a few people, you have Dinesh D'Souza, who's basically turned it into an entire virtue signaling game of calling the Democrats the real racists. And there's a rhetorical value to that, into getting normal people to be more skeptical of leftist narratives. But it's also basically just doing what the left does, which is just calling the opponents racist. And the right wing has never been able to utilize that word in the way the left has, because the right wing didn't invent the word, the left did. Racist is not a real word. It was an invention in the 1920s by communists, I believe. Trotsky, if I remember correctly, or I know at least he had a hand in it. And it's just a political term as a way to achieve change that the left wants. It's why the definition always revolves and changes. But I've spoken about this before, I'm pretty sure. So I won't hammer the point home. So yeah, you had D'Souza doing that. You had Ben Shapiro, someone who is utterly incapable of treating anyone who is a micro inch to his right with an ounce, not 1 ounce of intellectual honesty. just completely delusional about what the far right or the alt right is, and as usual, pretty typically hypocritical right wing Jew, because just identity politics for nobody except for the Jews. It's not okay. It's okay, but identity politics for white people is just terrible. You know, it's got to be said, got to be pointed out. He decided to turn this whole thing into a dick swinging contest with Milo Yiannopoulos, and he held Milo Yiannopoulos accountable for the violence, which is so beyond retarded. I don't even really have a rebuttal to that. Just pathetic attention seeking. Um, yeah, PJW, or Paul Joseph Watson, falsely stating that it was violence on all sides and everyone was doing an equal amount of beating and attacking each other. But I'm sorry, when you look at the actual evidence presented, it is remarkably clear that this is actually very typical of most rallies and political gatherings that we've seen in the last year and a half or 2 years here in the States, where people on the right, they get together to protest something or do something, and Antifa assaults them. Black Lives Matter assaults them. They instigate the violence. Now that the right wing is becoming much more defensive or preparing themselves, now they're the ones who are they're the ones instigating the violence, and that's what Paul Joseph Watson was suggesting on his Twitter timeline. And I'm not. Some of these guys might have walked back. There's others I could go down, or I could mention, and some of these guys might have walked that back. Whatever. I'm not saying none of them mentioned Antifa ever, but it's very important in the first 24 hours or so to really hammer in and focus on not allowing the left to establish the narrative. You never want to let them establish the narrative. As they're establishing it, you want to counter it as strongly as possible, because if you allow them to establish it, you always end up being on the back foot. The truth never gets out there, and you end up just one way or another explaining how you're not the violent one, how you're not the racist one, how you're not the terrible one, and that's just not persuasive. People are not persuaded by weakness. People are not persuaded by those who constantly apologize, and that's why the left wants you to do it, because people aren't going to believe you. All they're going to think is, well, if he wasn't a racist, why would he feel the need to constantly say that he's a racist? Et cetera, et cetera. And the fact that the conservatives had utterly failed as a general group, as a general rule, their group, total failure of combating the left, has allowed this, in this ever accelerating, ever intensifying culture war of ours, for this to be a pretty solid victory in their favor, which Charlottesville was. This was not a victory for the right. It wasn't a rout, it wasn't a total loss, but it was clearly a victory for them. And part of that blame needs to be firmly held in the hands of conservatives. There were some people on the civic nationalist side, on the populist side, like Lawrence Southern, for instance, who had tried to, get the truth out there that Antifa had antagonized them, that the police had dispersed the rally and forced them to go into crowds of Antifa and BLM members and etc., which of course got you exactly what you would expect, which is an all-out melee in the streets, which should be a surprise to no one. Speaking of those police, moving on from the conservatives, my second point is that I still see a lot of people on the right, and particularly the far right, who keep acting as if the police will honor their civil liberties. I have a rude awakening for you. The average policeman is generally fairly K-selected. That's their kind of mentality, right? More conservative, usually. Respect law and order. Keyword there is order. If they're told, the average policeman, if they're told to infringe on your right to peacefully assemble, to infringe on your right of freedom of speech, they will do so, and they will do so every time. The fact that they are distinctly more right-wing is one of the reasons why you can guarantee that they will infringe on your rights every time. because right-wing people really like order as a general rule. They like structure, and they try to, and they follow it. It's why they're so easy to manipulate. It's why the leftists, crave power over institutions, because they know they don't have to outnumber people on the right. They just have to tell them what to do. And right-wing people, as I said, are inclined to follow the orders of their superiors, even if they themselves don't agree with it. That's in no way advocating lawlessness. You, of course, follow the rules. There's no benefit to that. But I just think it needs to be hammered home because, the institution of law enforcement is distinctly leftist. Every single individual police officer, no. But as an institution, the law enforcement is firmly in the enemy's camp, so to speak. There are no institutions that are on the right-wing camp. None whatsoever. Maybe poll counts as an institution at this point, considering how much they can accomplish, but that's about it. There might be institutions that are neutral, that don't have a side, but they're not on the right-wing side. And if push comes to shove, they will end up in the left-wing's camp. Because it's far easier for the left to infect them than it is for the right to get in there. And we'll do the same, but for their side, or our side. So, yeah, that just needs to be reminded. I'm sorry, you need to let go of your fantasies about the noble policeman. I'm not trying to insult cops. I have a lot of respect for the guys, but I'm also not going to be naive in realizing that, surprise, surprise, cops tend to be very legalistic, and they just tend to follow the rules. They follow the rules, not necessarily their conscience. Moving on. We can definitely see that acceleration is going on. Now, if you don't know, acceleration is just this idea of making shit worse so that political change is more possible. I think this is very ethically iffy, but I won't get too much into the ethics of it for this video. Just more the practicality of it. I think at this current point in time, acceleration is not a great idea. I don't think it's not a guaranteed loss, but it's not a particularly good idea either. We are not really at the point where, these are like the first shots being fired in a new civil war, because normies have not been forced to take sides. There are still many, many, far many people who simply are outside this matrix, outside this constant, ever increasing pendulum swing, and they don't pay attention, and they're not going to pay attention until it affects them. Now, in a way, it doesn't really matter what we on the right wing do, because the left, and the regressive left particularly, they will do our work for us. I think Jared Taylor said something interesting in a video for Amrand a few weeks ago. He said something like, BLM has been a better recruiter for white identitarians than any, article they've written about, different averages of IQ across different racial groups. And it's true. The left is pushing so many people away from them that they're just swelling the ranks in a way that, the propaganda of the right wing, or even the far right, of the far righters, or the farther righters, in a way that, their own propaganda just can't compete with. So there might be acceleration, but it's not necessarily a disadvantage if the acceleration is done by the left. There is an advantage in being able to say to normal people, to the alt-centrist types, people who don't follow this stuff, there's an advantage to being able to say, hey, we didn't start this, so you can feel more morally secure that we're on the right side, because we didn't initiate violence, we didn't initiate the threats, we didn't initiate this breakdown of our cooperation in this country. So yeah, moving on. And again, like I said, this is just rambling, pretty much. There's no real priority here. I want to talk about the Nazi iconography. Now, it's funny, because there's so many people on the alt-right who, claim to represent the interests of white people, and they really care about their group and they want to see them do well. And I get that. I've become much more sympathetic to that view as time has gone on. But it's ironic because they seem to forget that white American culture is distinctly anti-Nazi. And if you keep reminding them of Nazis, then they are not going to be receptive to your messaging. When you show somebody a swastika, their frontal lobe gets shut down, and you just become the enemy, and you can't reason yourself. You can't reason them into listening to your viewpoint. Now, I want to make the distinction between in real life, IRL, political activities, and online. Online, do whatever you want. Because online, it's funny. It's funny when people troll and people do ridiculous things. But when you try to bring that into the public domain, in the real world, it doesn't translate. Shitposting doesn't quite translate when it comes to the Nazi iconography and the swastikas and the and the goose stepping and the sig heiling. And by the way, enough with this cutesy pussy shit about how sig heiling is really the Roman salute. Unless you're a babbling retard, you cannot possibly think that when you throw up a Roman salute, it doesn't look like a sig heil. Come on. Don't pull that shit. You know what you're doing. Take responsibility for it. Stop being coy. If you want to throw a sig heil up, just, I can at least respect you for admitting it, not trying to pretend that it's something else. And if I could reach out to the Nat Socks and the fasci types for a second. People who basically want to improve the image of Hitler. For the sake of this little talk me and you are about to have, I'll put to the side all the ethical or moral qualms I could offer about that, because it ultimately doesn't really matter. It's the central point. And the central point is that you cannot possibly convince white Americans, the average white Americans, of the, hypothetically, let's say, of the fact that Hitler was, he didn't do nothing, and, the Jews instigated World War II, and the Holocaust was exaggerated, or it didn't even happen, and that National Socialism was an amazing system. It restored the glory of Germany, and if it was just not for those international bankers, it would have been great. Fine. Hypothetically, I'll grant you all of that. How long do you think that's going to take to convince people? I'll give you a hint. Too long. It will take way too long. You will never get it done before the left has sufficiently imported voting blocks that makes the political abilities of white America defunct. You'll never do it in time. You have a choice. You have a choice, Nat Socks and fasci types and Hitler admirers who, you guys, you're part of the alt-right. I'm not. I'm just a concerned outsider. I'm a sympathizer, looking in. You have to make a choice between helping white Americans and their issues, the low birth rate, the mass immigration, etc., the destruction of their identity, the destruction of their heritage, etc. You have to make a choice between that and restoring the reputation of a 20th century ruler who assisted and participated in a war that caused the deaths of millions of white people. You have to make that choice. And anyone with an ounce of common sense would have to choose the former. You can have your beliefs. Believe what you want. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool free speech extremist, man. Have your, perspectives, whatever it is. But you have to stop using the swastikas. You have to stop reminding people about the Nazis. And I completely understand, because I can already see the comments coming. It was hundreds of people at the Unite the Right rally. Onyx, why are you being so unfair to us? It was like 3 or 4 people. I totally get it. And you should be fucking mean to those 3 or 4 people for just being so stupid, being so obstinate and short-sighted. Even if one guy does it, don't make it easy for the media to turn you into the caricatures that they want to turn you into. Yes, they're going to try it no matter what. But when you make it easy for them, you make it harder on yourselves to reach out to people and to build up enough numbers, which I'm assuming, you white identitarians, you white nationalists, etc. I'm assuming that's what you want, right? Like you want to grow your movement. It's like, well, just use some basic common sense here. Just use some basic common sense. Yeah, the autistic, fucking anything goes nature of the internet, that's different from the real world. In the real world, if you start throwing Nazi iconography around, if you start throwing Sig Heils around, start goose stepping down the street, screaming "gas the kikes" like the fucking Vanguard America guys were doing. I might be mistaken about that, so don't quote me. But 90% certain that's what happened to people from Vanguard America. A legitimately fascist organization start joking around, gas the kikes. Maybe they're joking around, maybe they're serious. Maybe. But that's such a stupid thing to do. Don't make it easy. Don't play into your enemy's strengths. Don't do it. Have it so that when they scream that you're crazy, irrational, psychotic Nazis, you want that to be contrasted with someone who is professional and looks clean cut, And so that when people see that and say, well, fuck those guys at CNN, fuck those guys at the New York Times, what they're telling me is happening is clearly not the case. Which brings me to my next point. Like I said earlier, I'm not really alt-right for a variety of reasons I won't get into here. But I do care about white people. I think they have some serious issues they need to deal with. And I'm concerned about how Richer and Co., or Richer, Spencer and Co., and how they are representing the movement. They don't seem to be especially competent, particularly in the realm of, let's say, I don't know, inviting David Duke. Whose idea was that? I know he was talking to Mike Enoch, and I saw a stream between those two guys, and Mike Enoch's chatting with him. It seems like he's at his house. Listen, David Duke's name has been irradiated beyond any point of repair. Bringing him in to your assembly, it's just making it harder on yourselves. And again, going back to what I said earlier, it's like, yeah, I get it. They're going to call you whatever they want. Fine. Let them call you whatever they want, but don't isolate yourselves from the rest of the right. I know cucks will try to do that, but don't let them. Don't let them. So yeah, inviting David Duke is short-sighted and stupid. And Spencer, why did he wait 2 days? See, this is what I mean when I said, don't let the left dominate the narrative. Don't do it. You need to get in there early, because if you allow them to establish what happened, you end up on the back foot. I know I'm repeating myself, but it's important. If you allow them to go first, you end up on the back foot. When something goes down, you have to hit them hard. And a lot of people were. But Spencer did not do a great job, in my opinion, because he gave out that press conference 2 days afterwards. The vast majority of people who are paying attention to the news on Saturday think white nationalists came to Charlottesville and beat the shit out of people. That's what they think. You've got to get ahead of the media in any way you can. And waiting 2 days, that's forever. That's forever in current events. That's a millennia. That's a million years. It's 100 million years. It's 100 trillion million thousand years. It's to the point where it's not useful. So they got to get some good PR. Maybe go find some Jews. Get some Jews and get them into your PR department. The Jews are very good at propaganda. Bring them in and utilize some human capital they got over there. Just a suggestion. Find some fashy Jews and they'll help you out. But anyway, yeah. I would caution people from maybe using Spencer as a figurehead. And I know he's not the leader. There is no leader of the alt-right. I get that. But he is the biggest name. He's the one the most people are most likely to know of. So his practices and how he carries himself, it's going to reflect on the rest of you guys in the alt-right. That's about all I have to say on Spencer. I guess my last point would be to liberals. Any liberals who happen to be listening to this. I want to bring something up to your attention. the alt-right's freedom of speech was infringed at Charlottesville. They had a permit to peacefully assembly, and it was rescinded unlawfully by the Virginia state government. They were dispersed, like I said earlier, they were dispersed by the police into a crowd of angry communist agitators, and a very predictable brawl broke out, in which many people were injured. At least one person died during the rally. I know 2 people died at the helicopter crash, which is really fucking weird, by the way. Like, that just reeks of CIA shit, but that's about all I'm going to say on that. But yeah, so lots of injuries. And it's because their rights to free speech were infringed. If their movement was given the same respect everyone else's was, you wouldn't have had all those injuries. You wouldn't have had somebody die. Probably. You might, at least might not have. Maybe he still would have driven over people. I don't know. You know, we still have things to figure out about this seeming domestic terrorist attack. But some other things have happened too. You know, if you had Laura Loomer, for instance, she's contacted Discord, I believe. She's, you know, kicked, I forget if it was the Daily Stormer or the alt-right Discord server, and kicked them off or got them removed from the platform. Now, I don't like the Daily Stormer. I understand a lot of things they do are just trolling, but a lot of it isn't. I don't hope that their views gain prominence. But my message to liberals is that if you allow the alt-right to have their political liberties be infringed, you're making a rod for your own back. And this is something I'm sure you know. It's something that's very easy to understand. But if you do not defend their right to speak, you're not going to persuade them from being identitarians, which I know a lot of you guys, you liberal types, you oppose. You're not persuading them from being identitarians if you turn them into martyrs and victims of state power. And 2, you're making a rod for your own back. You know, the media is in the process. The censorious media is desperately, trying to accelerate the establishment of, a more official police state that we're in. You know, America's already partially a police state, really, but they want it to be more formal. And if they can whip up a frenzy about scary white nationalists running through towns like Charlottesville, beating the shit out of people, and it's because they collect on the internet and they talk to each other and they communicate through memes. At least that's what I think is happening. I think they're dehumanizing them sufficiently so that they can make an example out of them. And if you don't stand up for their beliefs, or you don't stand up for the right for them to express their beliefs, as hard and uncomfortable as it may be, this will simply be applied to other dissident groups. You know, they're hitting the alt-right hard now because nobody has their side. Like I said at the beginning of this video, beginning of this conversation, this chat I'm having with my listeners, my 4 listeners, one of which is my grandmother, so I guess that doesn't really count. Hey, Grandma. Yeah, if you don't defend their right to speak, you're going to end up in a position where less radical groups, for lack of a better term, less radical groups will be censored as well. You know, when a state or an authority figure wants to enact, limitations on the right to free expression, they start with the most, out there extremist groups, for lack of a better term, extremist. I know that has an implication with violence. That's not what I'm trying to say. And they start with them because nobody's going to defend them, because they don't defend their views. And that's something you should be very mindful of. I'd keep a very wide eye open for further attempts to crack down on alt-right thought, especially since the alt-right is trying very hard to make itself known. And, when you make yourself known by the state, you make yourself a target of them as well. Maybe that's something they should have considered. Too late now. Cat's out of the bag. So yeah, for liberals, that's what you should really take away from this whole Charlottesville. That's something I'm hoping you guys are being mindful of. Because if you let the alt-right be censored, regardless of what you think of what they have to say, you're just going to guarantee it's going to be applied to you at a time when maybe you have something a little controversial to say, and suddenly the powers that be do not want you to say it. Oh, it's a pretty long video, half an hour. Wow. Well, that's about all I have to say, everyone. Hope you're all doing okay. Leave a comment, chat up with me. You can hit me up on Twitter, HonestOnyx Live, I believe. The link will be down below. Hope you're all taking care of yourselves, and peace out.